As a man thinks, so he is. As a woman thinks, so she is. What we think dictates what we feel and how we experience and receive and interpret life. Early in our marriage, Kimberly and I had several really good arguments over the garbage cans. You see, we had divvied up roles in our premarital counseling of she would do this in the house and I would do this in the house, and it was all equally divided. And I said, I want the trash cans. I want to take the trash cans out to the curb, and I want to take the trash cans back into the garage in the evening. And that's one of my things. I did other things. I do other things, but that was one of them. And so one day I came home from work, and she had beaten me home, and the trash cans were in the garage. And so I asked, why are the trash cans in the garage? Who took them into the garage? I knew who did it. There was only two of us at the time, and it wasn't me. But you see, we men like to make a point, and so I made the question, who moved the trash cans? And she said, I did. And I tried to act like it didn't bother me, but it did. And then the second time I came home, another time, and once again the trash cans were moved in the garage, and this time I was feeling it all the more. And I said, Kimberly, why did you do that? We've had this talk. I said, I'm the one who's going to move the trash cans from there into the garage, and you did it. Why did you do it? And she said, why are you getting all freaked out? It's no big deal. I just got home before you. I thought I'd help out. I moved them in. And I said, Kimberly, let me move the trash cans. And it happened again. Can you believe she would do it again? How? What is wrong with her? She's squeezing me the wrong way. What is wrong with her? She's doing it on purpose. What's wrong with her? And I came home, and sure enough, and I could feel as I'm pulling the garage, everything's boiling up inside of me. I said, Kimberly, who moved the trash cans into the garage? And Kimberly said, I did. And why? And I said, Kimberly, why would you do this? How many times have we talked about this? Are you doing this on purpose just to irritate me? And she said, Chad, what is wrong with you? Who cares who moves them? I'm just trying to help you out. And I said, all of a sudden, it came out of me what the real problem was. And I said these words. I said, Kimberly, there's not much I can do as a husband. I can't do all the handy things in the house that everybody else can do. When I try to fix things, it breaks more. But this is one thing I can do for you. My wife shouldn't have to take out the trash. And she looked at me as though I was insane, and I began to feel like I was insane. Because logically, I knew the trash cans didn't matter, right? Logically, I was thinking, Chad, if the woman wants to bring in the trash cans, let her bring them in, for God's sake. You don't have to do it then. Logically, I knew that, right? But experientially, you know what I was feeling? I'll tell you what I was feeling. Now, this sounds crazy, but you see, this is how light-based thinking works. I felt like a failure. If I couldn't even bring in the trash for my wife, I was some kind of husband that couldn't do anything else. You say, that's silly. I know, it is silly. But you see, it's not about the trash cans, and it's not about Kimberly. It's about some lie that I believed a long time ago about how Chad's a failure. And it was just brought up to the surface by that event, by those circumstances, by Kimberly. You see what I mean? It's not about her. It's about what I was believing inside of myself. Because as a man thinks, so he is. As a woman thinks, so she is. What's in us, what a sponge soaks up, a sponge will squeeze out. If we believe we are shameful because as a child someone sexually violated us, it won't matter that we were innocent. The shame lie will work itself into our lives as though it were true, and the consequences will be the same as though it were true. If I believe I'm not good enough, no matter what I do, I'll ever be good enough. It doesn't matter what kind of achievements I have. It doesn't matter how many people who love me pat me on the back and encourage me. It doesn't matter what I tell myself. It doesn't matter what scriptures I read to try to convince myself of it. If I don't know it experientially, I will live the lie, just not good enough. If I believe that I can't trust anybody, because if I trust anybody, they're just going to hurt me. If I believe that, it won't matter. If I meet the most trustworthy person on earth, I will look at their actions and I will hear their words and I will receive them as untrustworthy. Not because of them, but because of something in me that says, here's a lie. You can't trust anybody. They'll just hurt you. If I believe I cannot be forgiven by God for something I've done in my past, then I can read 1 John chapter 1 verse 9 that says, confess your sins, confess your sins, and He is faithful and just to forgive us and purify us from all unrighteousness. And yet live the rest of my life, even as a follower of Christ, absolutely convinced that while He can forgive me other things, and He can forgive other people of worse things, He can't forgive me of this thing. And I live under the guilt and the shame of it, even as a follower of Jesus, until the day I die. You see why? Because what a sponge soaks up, a sponge squeezes out. As a man thinks, so he is. As a woman thinks, so she is. And there's one particular woman who looked in the mirror and every day saw herself as fat, as ugly, and is unacceptable. Now, the circumstances of her life would tell her otherwise. The scale would tell her that's not true. The measurements would tell her that's not true. Those who loved her desperately and were trying to save her life would tell her that's not true. And if you and I looked at her, it would be so obvious, because all you would see is this painful frail of a body left in just skin draping over bones, because that's what anorexia has done to her. And she knows it's not true, logically, but experientially. Every time she looks in the mirror and she reads the little script that says, I'm fearfully and wonderfully made, she looks in the mirror and what she sees is, you're fat, and therefore you're ugly, and therefore you're unacceptable. Lie? Yes. Logically, she knows it. Experientially, she's dying from it. Where did all this come from? Where do you get a lie like that? Oh, it can be very simple, really. It may be a traumatic event. It may not be all that traumatic at all. For her, she was walking home one day from school with her other little friend when she was about 7 years old, and they're walking home from school and they're talking about things that little 7-year-old girls talk about, and all of a sudden her little friend said, hey, by the way, do you know how you can tell if somebody's fat? And she said, no, how can you tell if somebody's fat? She said, well, you take your hand and you put your fingers around your wrist, and if you can touch your fingers, you're not fat, and if you can't touch your fingers, then you're fat. Now, there's not a bit of scientific proof to that. We would look at that as adults and laugh at that, but as a little child, as a 7-year-old mind, not able to interpret and process all these things, you receive it as God's honest truth. And she did. And that night she went home and she started thinking about that, and she said, I wonder if I'm fat. And she took her fingers, and her fingers couldn't touch. And all of a sudden, in that moment, she received a lie, and she began to live according to it. I'm fat, therefore I'm ugly, therefore I'm unacceptable. And if it hadn't been for Jesus coming and giving her truth that set her free, she would not be here today. She would be dead. You see, that's the power of what Jesus in His Word is talking about. As a man thinks, so he is. As a woman thinks, so she is. What a sponge soaks up, a sponge squeezes out. Friends, can I ask you a question? What would happen if we began to see the dark stuff that comes out of us at times, and instead of saying, it's Marshall's fault, instead of saying, it's so-and-so's fault, instead of saying, if my circumstances would just be different, instead of saying, if I could just kick this habit that I have a problem with, then everything would be okay. What if instead we said, here's an opportunity to ask, where does this stuff come from? Apparently it was already in me before they ever squeezed. They just happened to bring it to the surface and squeeze it out. So where did that come from, God? What am I believing about myself? What am I believing about life or others? What am I believing about you that just isn't true? But experientially, it feels as true as any truth I've ever known. Where does that come from? Why is it there? What's it mean? Think of how that would change things. You ever notice how sometimes other people maybe can be offended by someone and an hour later they're okay? But for some of us, we get offended by somebody and weeks and months, years go by, and it's as though it just happened 3 seconds ago. Ever wonder why some people can walk on and you can't? Think there's something deeper there going on? Ever wonder why certain subjects come up and all of a sudden you feel just the whole body just kind of get tense and like something inside of you wants to panic and run, and you're like, where in the world? I just quit talking about it. And you say, I just don't deal with things like that. I just don't talk about things like that. And I just don't like to listen to things about that. Maybe it's not about what you listen to. Maybe it's about bringing to the surface something inside of you. Maybe that's God out of His love saying, let's deal with this. Let's deal with this dark thing in here. Let's look at it. You see what I'm talking about? We read last week this great promise from Christ. It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. God didn't just come to send His Son so that you could cope with your stuff until you get to heaven someday when you're dead. He came to give you freedom more and more, day by day, year by year, more and more freedom here and now. And it starts with identifying what the real problem is. So stop pointing the finger and at all the other possible problems and all the possible instigators and say, you know what? That wouldn't come out of me if it wasn't in me. Where'd that come from? Why is it there? Well, why am I living as though it's true?